Hey guys, Matthew here from the MMAT YouTube channel. One question I hear all the time is, should I get a Glock or an M&P9? Well, hopefully this video will help answer that question. The Glock 17 is one of the most popular striker-fired pistols in the world. Many others have copied its design, and for good reason. It's simple, and it works. Some copies have improved on the design, others added different features such as external safeties, and some copies are just that, copies. In fact, some were so close to the original that Glock had to sue a few companies. One of the first companies Glock sued was Smith and Wesson over the design of their Sigma. I've personally handled a Sigma, and the very first time it was handed to me, with no instruction whatsoever, I took it apart in seconds using the exact same techniques used to take down a Glock. I guess maybe Smith and Wesson might have liked the Glock design just a little too much. They settled it of court, and a short while later, the Smith and Wesson M&P9 was released with quite a few changes, but a little bit more on that later. So let's look at why the Glock has been so successful. First off, the gun is dead simple to operate. Just point and click. There's no external safeties, and the trigger is relatively short and easy to pull. It's reliable, as many torture test videos have demonstrated, and it's inexpensive. Well, it was. Prices have gone up recently. At least they have up here in Canada. Taking the Glock apart requires that you pull the trigger. Remember that all guns are to be considered loaded until you verify that it's empty for yourself. I like to lock back the slide and look directly into the chamber and then actually put my finger in to verify that there's no round in the chamber. I then like to look down through the magazine well from the chamber to make sure that there's no magazine. Once the gun has been cleared, close the slide and pull the trigger, of course keeping it pointed in the safe direction, just in case. Now here comes the tricky part. With your thumb behind the beaver tail, wrap your fingers up and over the slide and pull back slightly. Now with your other hand, pull down on both sides of the takedown tab and push the slide forward. It should come right off the front of the frame. Looking inside, we can see the simplicity of the design. This tab is attached to the striker, which is also called the firing pin, and when it's pulled back, it compresses a spring. When you pull the trigger, the tab is released and the striker springs forward, which ignites the round in the chamber. The recoil causes the slide to move to the rear, which ejects the spent casing, and then the recoil spring forces the slide back into battery, which strips a live round from the magazine and feeds it into the chamber. The frame of the gun is where all the operational controls are. We have the grip, which is also the magazine well, the trigger, the magazine release, and the slide lock. The magazine release and the slide lock are located on the left side of the gun, which favors the right-handed shooter. This is a third generation Glock, or a Gen 3. The Gen 4 Glock does allow the magazine release to be switched to the other side for left-handed shooters, but not the slide lock. The Gen 4 grip also has swappable back straps, which allows you to change the size of the grip from front to back to fit your hand better. The frame of the gun contains the trigger group and a number of internal safety mechanisms that prevent the gun from going off unless the trigger has been properly pulled. This tab on the trigger bar disengages the firing pin safety. The firing pin safety keeps the striker from protruding into the chamber, which keeps the gun from firing unless the trigger has been pulled. This section integrates a drop safety, which prevents the sear from disconnecting if the gun is dropped. And the trigger itself has a safety built into it, which doesn't allow the gun to be fired unless the trigger is properly pulled. Speaking of triggers, the Glock trigger weighs in at about 5.5 pounds from the factory, and it has a very short reset. This means that once you initially pull the trigger, the distance required to reset it is shorter than the full travel of the trigger. The recoil spring can be removed by adding a bit of pressure from the rear. It comes right out, and then the barrel pushes up and slides out the back as well. The barrel has polygonal rifling, not traditionally cut rifling with lands and grooves. It's said that the smoother edges of the polygonal rifling deforms the bullet less and provides a better seal in the barrel, so less of the burning gas from the gunpowder blows by. This supposedly provides higher velocities and better accuracy. It should be noted, however, that Glock does not recommend the use of unjacketed lead projectiles, as the barrel may become overly fouled, and this could cause malfunctions or even a catastrophic failure of the gun. The magazines hold 17 rounds, unless they've been pinned to 10 like the ones we have up here in Canada, and factory 10-round magazines are also available. It comes with plastic sights from the factory, but I've upgraded my sights out of personal preference. I think you'll find though that most others will agree with me in that the factory sights are just simply not all that great. The rear sight is dovetailed in place and it's adjustable for windage, and the front sight is screwed in place. Different front sights with varying heights can be swapped out to adjust the elevation. The Glock also has a loaded chamber indicator, which is part of the extractor. When a round is in the chamber, in this case a dummy round, the extractor is pushed out slightly, which is observable in good lighting or can be felt in low light conditions. So let's switch gears here and talk about the M&P9. It's also a striker-fired polymer frame pistol and in many ways mimics the functionality of the Glock. For instance, it has no external safeties, but it does differ from the Glock in a number of other ways. First of all, from its appearance, many can tell that it was designed with a bit more comfort in mind. The edges are all rounded and the grip just looks like it will feel better in the hand. Like the Gen 4 Glock, it also comes with interchangeable back straps, although these ones also beef up the sides of the grip as well, instead of just the front to back length. The pin that holds the back straps in place also doubles as a disassembly tool. The mag release can be swapped to either side, allowing both righties and lefties to comfortably operate the gun, and there's a slide lock on both sides of the gun, further enhancing its ambidexterity. I think I may have just made up a new word. The factory sights are metal and can be adjusted for windage. Elevation adjustments require the user to change out the front sight just like the Glock, except in this case, the front sight is dovetailed in place instead of screwed. The serrations on the slide are a little more aggressive, and it has a rotating takedown lever that operates a little differently from the Glock. To field strip the M&P9, first verify that the gun is unloaded. Leaving the slide locked to the rear, remove the disassembly tool and disengage the sear by pushing the sear disconnect lever forward and down. Rotate the takedown lever and hold it with your right thumb while you push the slide to the rear with your left hand to disengage the slide lock. The slide will then come off the front of the frame, just like the Glock. Alternatively, you can leave the sear disconnect lever in the up position and simply pull the trigger when the slide hangs up when you try to remove it. The idea behind the sear disconnect lever is that you can take the gun apart without having to pull the trigger, which gives you one more layer of protection should you forget to clear the gun. With the gun apart, we can see that the internals look very similar to the Glocks. We have the same spring-powered striker, although the firing pin safety is at the rear of the M&P instead of at the front with the Glock. The same style drop safety is also incorporated into the M&P9, which also has a trigger safety, although it operates a little differently. With the Glock, there's a small tab in the center of the trigger which prevents the trigger from being pulled if it isn't engaged fully. The M&P9's trigger is simply a small hinge with a tab sticking out the back. This means that even an improper trigger manipulation could cause the gun to fire. This might be good in a high-stress situation where you need your gun to fire right now even if you don't have a good grip. But it also means that the gun could accidentally fire if, say, a shirt tail gets caught in the trigger guard while trying to reholster. I'm not saying that the Glock trigger safety is immune to this, but it seems to me that it's a little less likely. The M&P trigger is a little more mushy in my opinion when compared to the Glock. It's also a little heavier at 6.5 pounds, and the reset is almost the full length of the trigger travel. Many feel that a longer reset on a trigger can make it more difficult to get quick follow-up shots, while others feel that a longer reset makes a gun a little less prone to negligent discharges. The recoil spring comes out of the gun in the same manner as the Glock, as does the barrel. The M&P9 barrel has traditional cut, lands, and grooves as opposed to the polygonal rifling of the Glock. The loaded chamber indicator is also built into the barrel in the form of a small hole on the top. A quick glance in good lighting is all it takes to see the glint of a brass shell in the chamber. However, there's no way to do this in low light conditions. And just like the Glock, Smith and Wesson offers both 10 and 17 round magazines. Both guns have a great reputation for reliability and usability, and in terms of accuracy, most people agree that ammo choice and personal preference for ergonomics and grip angle play a bigger role than most realize, and that it's up to the shooter to find the gun that they are most comfortable with. So which one is more accurate for me? Let's hit the range and find out. So here's a nice first-person view of the Glock sight picture. Remember that I have aftermarket Trijicon sights though. You can hear the distinctive click of the trigger reset, and I can tell you that it's really easy to feel. And here's the sight picture for the M&P9. No real noticeable difference. Each has a good sized rear sight notch and an easy to find front post. Notice how hard it is to hear the reset on the M&P9 though. It's also a bit more difficult to feel than the Glocks. So I'm shooting the Glock at the target on the left. Notice that the group starts out quite small and then opens up slightly. It's been a few months since I've done any serious shooting, so that's my bad. On the right target now with the M&P9, this group starts out rather poorly and then slowly tightens up as I get used to the trigger again after having just shot the Glock. The triggers really are that different. A better shooter than me though could likely print identical sized groups with each of these guns. Here's a great audio example of the Glock's trigger reset. You almost need ear protection just for that. Moving into some double taps, you can see that the muzzle stays relatively flat for me. With the M&P9 now, you can sort of hear the soft double click of the trigger reset. That's how it feels too. There's one tactile click that you feel, but then you need to continue to release the trigger for that second click. If you don't, the gun simply won't fire. You'll see that my double taps are definitely slower and that there's a bit more muzzle rise. That's likely a combination of the heavier trigger pull, longer reset, as well as the fact that I just don't find this gun comfortable to get a good crushed grip on. And finally, here's a close-up view of both pistols being fired. It's probably quite obvious to most of you that I prefer the Glock. That being said, this is simply my personal preference. I have many shooting buddies who prefer the M&P9 and just don't like the feel of the Glock. You're just going to have to get out there and try both to decide for yourself which one you prefer. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching. We'll catch you next time.